You've probably heard it around like a million times. Specificity. It sounds like an advanced concept that's even hard to pronounce, let alone learn. Specificity? Well, fret not. For today, we'll make it simple. I'll show you what it is and what you can do to make it work for you. My name is Vlad, and I'm here to show you that web development is easy. Let's get going. So what is CSS specificity? It's how the browser decides which rules to apply to an element. That's it. Now let's see an example. I've made my own Google. It's called Loogle and it's 10 times better. You just type in your search query, hit the buttons, and nothing happens. Genius. It's the next big thing actually. If there are any investors around you, please contact me. Here's the HTML. The CSS is nothing complicated, but let's just assume it's a big black box of complicated mess that we cannot touch. Now, as enterprising as I am, I'm thinking that this search button would look so much cooler with red background and white text. Let's make it happen. I'm gonna select it using its class, pop it up here, and give it the color of white. We'll save it, go back, refresh, and it worked. Perfect. Now let's go back to the code and give it the background color of red. Save this, go back to the code, refresh, and bam, it doesn't work. Tough luck. Let's see why it doesn't work. We'll just inspect the main search button in the developer tools, and we'll look at the rules. Here's our rule, main search button. Recognize it? Here's another rule that affects this button in the main complicated mess that I told you not to touch. Our background color red rule is grayed out. Why did this happen? When it looks like this, it is because another rule overrides it. We can find that rule up here, background color, this type of gray. Why does this happen? Because this rule up here, it's more specific than our rule. We can interpret this in English as well. The rule up here is made for elements with the class of search button, which are descendants of an element with class search buttons. This goes very in depth, way more in depth than just saying elements with the class of main search button. So it wants specific. Let's give it specific. Let's go for this selector. Form div a first child. So it's the first anchor child of a div inside a form. Sounds pretty specific to me. Let's save and give it a test. And it still doesn't work. It's still not specific enough. Now if we go back into the code, we can make this work by specifying this rule, for example. Search buttons a dot main search button. We'll save it. Let's check right here for now to see if it's good. So it's the main search button anchor inside the search buttons element. We've saved this, go back, refresh, and voila, it works. It finally has the background color of red. Well, now that we've seen that we cannot just wing specificity, there is a very simple way to calculate it precisely. I call this the S value just because I really hated tongue twisters as a kid. This involves seeing every selector like this, a series of 3 numbers, where the first is the number of ID selectors, the second is the number of class selectors, and the third is the number of type selectors. It's actually a little bit more than that, but we'll go into it in just a second. Now before you freak out about formulas, let's just see an example real quick. Let's say we've got this selector. Here's the formula. Let's go through it. We've got one ID, we've got 2 classes, and we've got 2 types. This gives us an S value of 1, 2, and 2. Let's see another example. Here's the rule, here's the formula. For this selector, we've got one ID, we've got 2 classes, and we've got only 1 type. This gives us an S value of 1, 2, and 1. Now 122 is larger than 121, therefore our highlight element will have the color of green. Now here's your chance to practice. What will be the final color of the element in this scenario? We've got the blue rule and we've got the green rule. Both are for the same submit button. Pause the video right now and try to think about it. Have you got it? Let's see. For the first element, we've got one ID, we've got two classes, and we've got three types. The second element has one ID, two classes, and only two types. 123 is larger than 122, therefore our submit button will have the color of blue. Now you might say, but Vlad, what if I've got this monster of a selector? For illustration purposes, it looks like this. Horrendous, I know, but please bear with me. You can see that the final div also has the class of final. Now if we want to select the final div, which selector will win? The first horrendous one or the second short one? Well, let's see. The first one has an S value of 0013 because it has 13 types, while the second one only has one class, so it's 010. Well, you might think 13 may be larger than 10, but it's actually not how it works. The final class wins. One class is always stronger than any number of types, just like one ID beats any number of classes and types. We're not done. Bear with me just a little longer. I did oversimplify the formula a bit just so I don't scare you away. The actual formula looks like this. It's the same series of three numbers where the first is still the number of ID selectors, the second is number of class selectors plus the number of attributes plus the number of pseudo classes, and the third is the number of type selectors plus the number of pseudo elements. The wildcard selector, as well as any kind of descendant or sibling selectors, have no S value. They do not affect the result. If you've got trouble identifying which is which, attributes are always encased in square brackets, pseudo classes always begin with 1 colon, while pseudo elements always begin with 2 colons. Now that we know this, let's calculate the specificity for this selector. Here's the formula. Is the final one this time. Please pause the video, think about the solution, and see if you get it right. Have you got it? We've got 0 IDs this time. We've got one class and one attribute without any pseudo classes, and we've got one type and one pseudo element. This gives us an S value of 0, 2, and 2. Let's see another example. Here's the formula again. Pause the video, see if you can come up with the solution. Did you do it? We've got 0 IDs again. We've got 2 classes, 0 attributes this time, and 2 pseudo classes, and we've got 2 type selectors with no pseudo elements. This gives us an S value of 0, 4, and 2. Take note that the child selector right here did not matter in the final result. Another rule of thumb is that if the style is specified inline directly in the style attribute, it trumps everything. No matter what other CSS we might have on the element, inline styles will override them. In this example, you can see that we've got an ID in the selector up here, but the final color of the primary div will still be red. The only exception to this would be using the important keyword, but I'll cover that in a later video and leave a link to it in the description below. For now, just remember, important beats everything, while inline styles beat regular styles. Now that we've seen some complicated selectors, let me just say that these do tend to be quite rare. I recommend keeping your CSS selector short in order to prevent confusion. Unless I need to override some other rule, I find it best to stick to 1, maybe 2 elements in my selectors. This allows me to override some other rules when necessary without creating long and confusing chains of selectors. If you liked this video, please hit the like and subscribe buttons below and feel free to write your questions and thoughts into the comment section.